Okay.
The hazards of driving and podcasting.
So after DYDX, you joined Polygon as the Chief Legal Officer. After that, you've now taken up as CEO. It's been probably like 7 months now,
Yeah.
right? At all-time high, Matic was priced around $2.92, which makes Polygon around $29.2 billion worth, right? So now let's try to break down the art of being a CEO, right?
Yep.
And what are the crucial, like if you were to nail down 3 important pillars for any person who aspires to be a CEO, or who's probably already in that state, who's begun that journey of being a CEO of an early stage company, right?
Yep.
How would you break it down?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I don't really think of us as like a $30 billion company, because like ultimately, like the value that Matic has comes from like the ecosystem as a whole, right? It comes from like all the awesome devs, builders in the ecosystem. And like, yeah, we are a part of that. And like, we build some meaningful aspects of the technology, but like overall, like the ecosystem is the one that needs to like generate that value. Like we could not generate that value alone at all.
Right.
And so I think of us as just like a sliver, and it's a meaningful sliver, but still just a sliver of like everything going on in the ecosystem. In terms of like the CEO, I think there's like different types of CEOs. I'll call them like the big difference that I say is like, I think there's some like more like what's called them like external facing CEOs, and then some more like internal facing CEOs.
Okay.
And like both of them have overlap. So like maybe people look at me and think like I'm more external facing. It's not actually true at all. Like from my perspective, like the most important thing as a CEO is to like take care of employees.
Right.
Like number one thing.
Team building, culture building.
Culture building. And frankly, just like, I think I said this like the first day that I took over. I think I told all the employees, like, my goal is to make you the happiest employees in the world. And there's like a simple reason for this, right? Like, A, I actually do like people being happy. That's good.
Yeah.
But second, like, if you hire good people and then you make sure they're happy, everything's done.
Right.
There's basically like nothing else to do.
Right.
And so I think that's like one very important aspect is like really focusing on that. I think like the second one is just like strategy.
Right.
And this is just important for like any CEO, and it's pretty obvious, but
Right.
I think that in Web3, it has like particular importance because there's so many shiny objects like everywhere that you can go looking for. Everything's moving so fast. But I think like the ability to like identify a strategy, reevaluate it, and like stay like laser focused on that strategy is like one of the most important things that you could do. And so once you get past like employees and strategy, and then you get to like the obvious thing, which is like execution, right? And like a lot of that execution gets taken care of if you've got like happy, good employees. But there's still like a way of working where you like make it easy for those employees to work well, right? If you think about it from like a organizational structure, like how is it exactly that you're actually like structuring things internally? What tools and systems and processes you do, or lack of processes, things you take away to make it easier for employees to actually execute, that ultimately takes care of it, right? So if you've got like strategy and you've got good execution and good people, done.
So keeping employees happy, right? How does Polygon ensure that the employees are happy?
Yeah, so I think it's like a few things. So one is there's like the leadership perspective, and then there's like a little bit more like after that. Like from a leadership perspective, my view is like the best thing that I can do is set like everyone's expectations in a good way and be transparent about it. So like if I'm an employee, what do I really want? I mean, ultimately what I want is like, I want to be part of a company that I think is going to succeed and that is going to treat me well.
Right.
And so what does that actually mean? Well, if I want to know, I need to know how they're going to succeed. So you need to be extremely transparent about what it is that you're thinking strategically, what position the company is in, what changes you plan on making in the company, right? All those things like give me confidence on like, are we going to succeed or not? And then, am I going to be treated well? Well, a good part of like being treated well is like actually knowing like what is going on, like what do I have like a right to? And you feel much better when the answer is you have a right to know anything. Right. So like my perspective is like, give employees like all the information that they want. And that's like maybe like step number one. I think step number two then is actually actually doing things to treat them well. So like when they have concerns, like actually listen to it and respond to it. So I have, for example, like a suggestion box, right? So like anyone, they can make it anonymous if they want or not. They can drop like a message that I will respond to, and usually whatever it is that is needed, like take care of it. Obviously they've got like managers who kind of like help with that as well, but if they want access to me, like they have that. We also do like all hands, right? And like another way is like just making sure that like in those all hands, we allow people to ask questions anonymously. They can ask questions non-anonymously, and we'll answer like every single one, no matter like what it is. I think we've done like, I don't know, probably we've done 45 minutes of questions at some times in the past where we'll walk through every single one. And it doesn't matter because ultimately like everyone needs to feel like they can ask the questions and get those answered. And then there's like the other things, right? Like compensate people fairly, give them benefits fairly, let them take vacations when they want it. And that ultimately to me is like the key. And then I think the last one that ties into all this is like what your values are. So like when I interview folks, what I'll oftentimes is like actually interview them questions that like tie into like what our values are. And then I'll be very transparent, and we obviously do it when we onboard employees, but I encourage our people team to do it like beforehand, is like actually let people know like what are Polygon's values as like Polygon Labs. And to me, that's like super important, because when you get in and you're like, okay, so I'm expected to perform ambitiously. Okay, so Polygon actually wants me to like work hard. Well, I better know that before like actually joining. Like I need to respect people. I need to serve people. Like all those types of things are like things that you would want to know before joining. And so you set those expectations right, and then you treat them right when they're there, and employees end up being happy.
Got it. Second, as you mentioned, strategy, or how I like to think is it as decision making, right? And decision making is a skill that you're continuously honing. It doesn't come naturally like from day one, right? That's something that you need to practice, or the more you do, the better you get at just judging outcomes. What is your decision making process like? Is there a framework to it? Is there a group of people you vet your ideas with? Is there a method to the madness, is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm like a very linear thinker. And so to me, like life and every decision I make is effectively like a decision tree. So I get to like, what is the outcome that I want? And then I just work my way back as to like all the possibilities to get to that outcome. And then I put like percentage in my mind of like likelihood of success based off of those. That's just like how my mind like works. And then I like reach an outcome based off of that. And so like think of it as like the easy decisions, or the decisions that are like low impact. You just make them quickly. Like just go. Don't like run it through, and that's it. Because you got to ultimately like move. And then there's the decisions that are things that, and I've actually like told like walk the company through like how to think from this perspective, is like there's the decisions where that first set where it's like if you're wrong, the impact is low, and or you can reverse that decision really easy. So like wasting time on it doesn't make a lot of sense. But then you've got like a whole other set of decisions, which is things that either the impact is really high, and therefore the decision getting it right is incredibly important, or even if it's like lower impact, reversing it is like very difficult, whether it's from a resource perspective or or an impact perspective. And so those are the things where like same thing, but you go and you vet them, right? And like the size that impact depends, right? Like I've got a good team around me, so I can go talk to like our COO or CLO or CPO, whoever it is, and like get their perspective. Sometimes it's all of them, sometimes it's a subgroup of them. And that's really helpful. And then when it's like the most important decisions, I work with the founders and I get their perspective on it as well. And we end up coming to kind of a decision on it. And so to me, this really comes down to like, how important is the decision? How easy is it to reverse the decision? And then you execute faster or slower based off of that. But to me, like the key is like, once you make a decision, just stick to it and go. because you can always second guess yourself, and that's like a waste of time.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people get stuck at the point when when they have to make that decision. They think, what if this thing goes wrong, and then they end up wasting a lot of time. Do you think how do you tackle that?
I kind of view it as like, do you have the information that you need? And like a lot of people do this, and I can see value at times. I'm not like really in favor of this, because you got to move, which is people like to like make a decision and then like sit and wait for more information.
Right.
And most of the time, like if you've done a good job thinking through an issue, talking to the right people, you've gathered the information that you need, and so go make a decision.
Right.
It's only in situations where there's more information that you could need or that time will give you that like maybe you should actually like wait or slow down. In those situations, that makes sense. But most of the time, like you can gather the information you need. It's like it's relatively static information, and you execute based off of it. No point in waiting. You made the wrong decision. That's okay. Like we all make plenty of wrong decisions. Like one of the values that we have at the company is like accept mistakes.
Right.
Like I make a boatload of mistakes.
Right.
You've probably made a boatload of mistakes.
Yeah,
we all make a boatload of mistakes. It's like it's fine.
Yeah.
I'd just like much rather us like execute, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes,
right.
go, than like sit there and like think about it all day long.
All right, so we've covered team building, we've covered decision making. The third thing that I feel is really important as a CEO is when you're looking at a company, how do you align all the stakeholders and incentives? Because as your company is going to grow bigger, the amount of stakeholders are going to go bigger, and so the stakes as well, right? Now, if we just think about Polygon, you have like so many people. You have your investors, you have your users, you have your community members, right? You have the token price. A machine really works well when all the parts are just like oiled smoothly and they're working together cohesively, right? The size of Polygon, given like you mentioned 300, 350 employees, how do you ensure that happens smoothly?
Yeah, I mean, I think first is like what are the things you can control, what are the things that you can't control, right? And so like keeping in mind that like Polygon isn't just like a company, right? It's like there's an entire ecosystem.
Right.
I don't worry about the things that I can't control. Like what are the things that I can control? And the answer, it's what Polygon Labs does, right? And so like I look at like what Polygon Labs does, and that's what I like focus on. Ultimately, like a lot to me of that from that perspective like flows back into like the culture and the values that you bring in, because like ultimately, like I talked about some of those. Like another one, for example, that we have is like take ownership, right? So if you embed like that value within the organization quite well, what it does is it actually reduces a lot of the issues that you have with like a bigger company. I think like once you get frankly past like 50 people, this starts becoming like really important. It's like you get to a point where there start becoming like gaps, right? Like not everyone knows what everyone else is doing.
Right.
And some people are like, oh, I'm relying on them to do this, or that person to do that. And when that happens, that's when you start getting people who are like, well, I'm not going to do this because this person's going to do it. And they just assume that, right? And so like embedding this value of like take ownership of things, right? If you see something that needs to get done, you make sure it needs to get done. Now, how that gets done depends. Maybe it's something that's actually yours and you go and you pick it up and you actually execute on it. Or maybe it ends up being something that's not something that you're supposed to do, but that is something that somebody else is going to do. And so you go and you make sure that that other person is actually taking care of it. And so those are like the kind of things, like I think that's a key one. I think like another one is like we have like a value of serving others. From my perspective, like if I'm in a company and I want it to like execute well, one of the best things I can do is like help others out like anytime. So if I take ownership of my stuff and then I'm willing to like serve others, help them in the way that they need, be there for them, well, hopefully they're going to end up doing the same thing for me. And if you're able to like embed that value, and they are, now you've got an organization where people are taking ownership of stuff and people are helping each other out in doing them. It doesn't really matter what size of an organization you are. Again, it's always easier when you're smaller, but like regardless, you're going to have an organization that if people buy into that is going to operate pretty darn well at any size. And so those are two things that I think are like particularly important for being able to like operate well as you get bigger.